All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're diving into the evolution and trends of English language cinema. We're going to trace exactly how a simple, almost parlor trick scientific curiosity transformed into the absolute global hegemon of storytelling.
Before it became this massive, multi-billion-dollar juggernaut, cinema was really just the ultimate culmination of humanity's long-standing obsession with capturing space, time, and movement. It started off as a pure technological novelty that just wanted to hold a mirror up to life itself.
We've got a massive journey ahead of us across 3 continents, so here is our roadmap for today. 1. The quest for realism. 2. The birth of the Hollywood empire. 3. Sound and the golden age. 4. Surviving television. 5. British cinematic traditions. And 6. The Australian film revival.
Kicking things off with Section 1, the quest for realism and the drive to capture life.
So why do we even invent movies in the first place? Well, the psychological drive behind it is perfectly captured by French critic André Bazin. He coined this term the similarity complex. It's basically humanity's absolute obsession with the accurate reproduction of sensory experiences and reality. This deep-seated need to make events and characters pass right in front of our eyes, that literally explains the medium's entire hero's journey, from those humble early projections to today's massive digital masterpieces.
Moving right along to Section 2, birth of the Hollywood empire and fleeing the monopolies.
Okay, this is honestly one of the greatest ironies in film history. Thomas Edison over on the East Coast secured the patents for flexible celluloid film, formed a trust, and started aggressively suing independent producers for royalties. So what did they do? To escape this monopoly, those targeted filmmakers essentially packed their bags and fled the East Coast entirely. They traveled all the way to California and set up a new little movie village called Hollywood. Meaning, the mighty Hollywood empire was basically founded by scrappy independents running away from a patent war.
Once they were securely settled on the Californian coast, pioneering directors like D.W. Griffith stepped up and basically wrote the rulebook. He established the essential visual language or grammar of cinema that we still use right now. He invented the division of shots into different sequences. He figured out how to exploit the dramatic effects of parallel actions. And crucially, he completely modified the spectator's point of view just by moving the camera. He literally taught audiences how to see film, turning it from a static, stage-like play into a dynamic, flowing narrative.
Which brings us to Section 3, Sound and the Golden Age, and the absolute panic of the talkies.
Now you might think adding sound was just a fun, easy tech upgrade, right? Actually, scratch that. It was a terrifying pivot for the industry. The silent era relied on highly expressive mimics and live narrators in the theater, but triggered by 1927's The Jazz Singer, the arrival of the talkies meant actors had to completely relearn how to articulate speech. This wasn't a smooth transition. It flat out destroyed the careers of many silent stars whose actual speaking voices just didn't match their grand, larger-than-life on-screen personas.
But out of all that chaos emerged the legendary Golden Age star system, which really flourished in the 1930s and 40s. The industry pivoted hard. Suddenly, audiences were going to the cinema specifically to see a star. We're talking Clark Gable or Greta Garbo, rather than just going to see a specific film. And to really reinforce this new brand of American royalty, the industry established the Academy Awards, the Oscars, to publicly reward these innovations and cement the power of the major studios.
All right, let's look at Section 4, Surviving Television, a medium under threat.
As we move into the post-war era, as a matter of historical record, the McCarthy hearings brought severe political scrutiny to the movie-making scene. Roughly 320 people in the industry suspected of left-wing views were impacted by purges, and this incredibly tense atmosphere fundamentally pushed Lost Generation directors toward a much darker, shadowy, and far more cynical cinematic worldview.
But honestly, the biggest gut punch to the industry was technological. Just look at these numbers. Production literally plummeted from 527 American films in 1939 down to just 232 by 1954. Television had invaded American living rooms, and it was directly threatening the supremacy of film as the dominant form of mass entertainment.
So how do you survive that kind of onslaught? Hollywood aggressively bifurcated its strategy. On one end of the spectrum, they started churning out massive, large-budget historical and biblical epics, like 1953's The Robe, giving audiences these giant, colorful spectacles that you couldn't possibly experience on a tiny TV box. But simultaneously, there was a huge rise in underground cinema, creating really low-cost, independent films via cooperatives, heavily inspired by the agile, gritty language of European neorealism.
Let's cross the pond for Section 5, British cinematic traditions, and transatlantic cross-pollination.
Because American cinema simply cannot be understood without its British counterpart. The British industry developed its own highly distinct flavor early on. The Brighton School essentially invented the natural set by filming outdoors. They also cultivated a deep literary tradition of adapting classics to the screen, starting way back with Oliver Twist in 1912. John Grierson founded the incredibly influential documentary school with Drifters in 1929, and later, the free cinema movement saw angry young men in the 50s and 60s rejecting the conventional establishment in favor of fierce working-class realism.
What's really fascinating here is the symbiotic relationship between the two nations. This transatlantic exchange was a continuous cross-pollination of ideas, talent, and resources, driven by cultural exchange and, let's be real, a shared reliance on the massive U.S. leisure market. British and American cinemas were basically constant collaborators in shaping the modern English-language film aesthetic.
And finally, let's head over to Section 6, the Australian film revival, from the outback to the world. Get this, Australia released the world's very first feature-length film, The Story of the Kelly Gang, all the way back in 1906. But despite that incredible milestone, their industry was nearly crushed. By 1940, domestic studios like Cinesound closed, leading to a near-total American monopoly. It actually wasn't until the 1970s, when the Australian Film Commission was created, that a massive, state-supported cinematic revival finally took hold. And this new wave of Aussie filmmakers didn't just try to copy Hollywood, they looked inward. The hallmarks of this 1970s revival focused intensely on showing authentic Australian social reality. They showcased the plight of contemporary Aboriginal peoples, think Peter Weir's The Last Wave. They used historical settings to spark modern political controversy, and they just told unapologetically local stories. And that deep local focus eventually exploded into massive global commercial hits in the 1980s, like George Miller's absolutely iconic Mad Max.
Okay, let's pull all this together. 127. That is how many years it's been since the very first public film screening in 1895. Over 10 million. In that time frame, humanity has churned out an estimated 10 million plus films worldwide, just an absolutely staggering volume of creative output, all driven by that similarity complex we talked about.
And 8 billion. Today, an estimated 8 billion people engage with film content every single year. It proves that cinema is truly the ultimate universal language. It completely transcends linguistic barriers to become humanity's quintessential popular art form. So here is the final provocative question I want to leave you with today. As cinema continues to rapidly evolve through new digital and immersive technologies, what will the next century of humanity's similarity complex actually look like? As we push further into an era of virtual reality and whatever comes beyond that, how will our relentless drive to perfectly capture reality reshape the movies next? Definitely something to think about the next time the lights go down in the theater. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.